Sunday the 26th of June 2016. Words can't really ever describe what today involved. If it's not bad enough backing up a marathon with a marathon in a desert ultra, throw a night of rain into the equation and you get a bleak picture. Add to it a day of rain and low temperatures, very low by desert standards, and you get the ingredients for a day from hell. And really, in all honesty, that is what it was. Welcome everyone, I am Andrew Neville. Welcome to the Running with Heart podcast. Episode 2, we're back for week number 2 as we go on our 12-month journey to the Sonder Monster and running the Larapinta Trail in the Northern Territory in May 2022, all in support of the Heart Foundation, Mission 231. That little insert I was reading was from my running journal from the Big Red Run event that I ran with Craig, my running buddy, back in 2016. Craig and myself started running together, I believe it was in 2014, when he came on an impromptu run to Meadow Flat, 14 Ks from Portland. And then a couple of weeks later, I believe, and he probably had to verify the story, he backed up and ran his first half marathon, pretty much from scratch, with not much running behind him. And as they say, the rest is history. We continued doing some running together. And then we did the training for Big Red over a bit over a 12-month period. And then we went to the Birdsville, to the Simpson Desert, where we did the six-stage day ultra marathon event. And the reason looking at that is because that is where I think with this episode of the podcast, we're looking at the Larapinta Trail and the Sonder Monster, and why am I doing the Sonder Monster? Why have I picked that? And I think this, particularly this day, Sunday the 26th of June, is where the journey actually began for Larapinta. And we're going to read a bit more from that now so I can then expand on it a bit more as to why the Sonder Monster is now the event I'm training for in support of the Heart Foundation and developing Mission 231. So let's go to that right now. We'll read a bit more from my journal. So Sunday the 26th of June 2016, as I mentioned, we've just had a night of rain. We've done day 1 of Big Red Run, 42 kilometres. The way Big Red Run worked was 42 kilometres day 1, 42 kilometres day 2, day 3, another marathon, 42 kilometres. Day 4 was a shorter day, around 30 kilometres. And then day 5, the big day, was 84. And then we had a 6 to 8K run back into Birdsville on day 6. I think that would have been. However, it didn't all go to plan. Day 1, done and dusted, we were feeling good. And then day 2, night 1, we had the rain. And day 2, we wake up. At camp, we woke to a mud bath. It was hard just to walk around without falling over. The mud in parts was like clay, in other parts like ice. And so thick. The rain was still falling as we had breakfast and prepared ourselves for the run and the day ahead. So we're camping in the middle of the desert. They've set up camp. The volunteers would set up camp for us. We'd sleep in the tent in the middle of the desert. Due to the weather, we were required to carry a mandatory cold and wet weather gear. Rain jackets were worn, and then thermals, fleece, and pants squeezed into our packs. Very disappointing and disheartening, as after the heavy pack carrying yesterday, we were looking forward to a normal weighted pack today. By the day's end, that would be the least of our worries. The race was due to start at 8:30. The rain was still falling and the campsite was worsening as a mud bath by the minute. Due to being on the dry lake bed, there were holes and it was clay in parts. You sunk into the mud in parts as well. Where there were heavy foot traffic, it was severely churned up and was slippery and near impossible to walk on. We were due to run across the entire lake bed from the word go. It wasn't going to be a pleasant experience. Starting in the rain and the mud with a lake bed to cross, I came up with a strategy while going to the toilet before we were due to start. I revealed it to Craig whilst we were standing on the start line. Our strategy was to head out first and be in the lead group and get across the lake before it was all churned up and as bad as the camp. We did well crossing in the top 10 and avoiding any spills. It was then over a sand dune to be greeted by a bleak picture. It was just dark and grey everywhere you looked. And there was water and mud appearing everywhere as well. It didn't matter what you ran on, whether it was a sand dune, a dirt road, or down in the valley. The ground was wet, muddy, and slippery, and the Giver Plains were filling rather quickly with puddles. The rain continued to pour. We were wet, and the fun was quickly disappearing. As we continued to push on, I found the coat and heavy pack, well, not uncomfortable, perhaps awkward, frustrating might be a better word. It just wasn't how I pictured it. But at the same time, I knew this would happen. So many of our long runs had been in or interrupted by heavy rains, wind, or a storm. The run to Bathurst is a good example. We talked about it during those training runs, how they were preparing us for a wet desert run. But now we were here doing it. Nothing could prepare us for this. We came slipping and sliding down one dune to be greeted by what appeared to be the shores of a great lake. With a second look, you could see the pink markers we were meant to be following marked out straight through the middle of it. The Giver Plain was flooded, completely flooded. We carefully picked our way around the edge of it, took some photos as well, because unless you saw it, you would not believe it, that this was a desert. This massive lake sitting in the middle of the desert. After navigating our slippery way around the shores, we came to a checkpoint. The first one. We still had a long way to go, and we were drenched. The weather looked like it had definitely set in for the day. As we left that first checkpoint, we were mentally preparing for the long haul of 42.2 kilometres in wet, slippery and muddy conditions. We had no idea what the day had in store for us. The thing with running in the rain like we were, for me anyway, is you tend to focus more on the here and now. You don't wander to 5 kilometres down the road or even 20 kilometres down the road. You don't think how far you've got to go in time sense, which is a good thing. It still isn't pleasant though. Your focus is just head down, brace against the cold and the rain, and look at the ground in front of you. It does become almost literally one step at a time. Craig and myself weren't talking a great deal. The rain and the cold had taken a lot of enjoyment and fun from what I guess we had expected of each day, and the fact that our conversation level was low was probably a bad thing for us mentally. We had let the weather dictate our mood instead of us making the best out of a pretty grey situation. It wasn't all silence all the time though. We did whinge about the day and our circumstances. We kept ticking off kilometre after kilometre, each one through mud, wet sand or grass or puddles on the Giver Plains. We also tried to crack a joke about the situation as well, just to try to lighten the mood. By the time we came into the checkpoint at around 30 kilometres, we were drenched, very cold and uncomfortable with our wet gear, packs and the heaviness of it all. One bright moment was seeing Monique and her crew out here at this checkpoint, though I felt sorry for her and the crew, being out here all day waiting for the runners in the conditions. We had it bad, but I think the volunteers may have had it worse today. From Monique's checkpoint, we were pointed down a gravel road, or what was meant to be a gravel road. Before us lay mud, deep mud, slippery mud, thick mud. We were told 10 kilometres to the next checkpoint, straight down the road. We left Monique and her team with perhaps the most energy we had found all day. Finally, after 30 kilometres and hours out here in the wet, cold and mud, the end was in sight. Not literally, but 10 kilometres down the road and then a sand dune crossing. Unfortunately, the spring in our step probably didn't last 100 metres. The road was a nightmare. Words cannot describe the condition of it. It was at times almost impassable. It took all of our energy just to stand upright. It was like ice skating, but slipperier. It was very slow going, and this final obstacle was what we didn't need both mentally and physically. We wanted the run over now. We wanted the day over now. We wanted to be dry. We wanted to be warm. And the realization was setting in of what awaited us back at camp if we were able to get through the 10 kilometres of slippery, thick mud. At camp, we had very little to change into. We had to pack light to meet the weight requirements. All of our warm gear was in our packs, more likely than not, wet. We had no hot showers waiting for us either, just a wet tent and a mud bath surrounding it. We were forced to walk along the road, switching from side to side looking for the least slipperiest surface. When we tired of walking, or more so the time it was taking, we decided or told ourselves that the road was runnable. We would break into a run that would last only a few steps. As our feet started sliding from under us, we would reluctantly and depressingly return to a walk. The 10 kilometres was taking forever. We were getting increasingly wet as the rain continued to fall, and I was now freezing and starting to fear hypothermia. We were miserable. As we trudged along, we talked about what the organisers would be doing back at camp to deal with this situation, the extreme wet weather. We figured the weather had deteriorated that much, beyond what anyone had expected. They would definitely be looking at ways to overcome our cold and our wetness. We figured perhaps they may bus us back into town, that's to Birdsville, to use the demandable showers, or they would allow us access to our bags that we'd left in Birdsville with our extra clothing in, dry clothing. We thought that perhaps due to the worsening conditions, they may call the entire event off. We figured they had a duty of care and would look at the best possible scenario. To be honest, right at that point, despite all the hours, time and money we had put into this journey, I would have not have minded if I was told it was all over. I was miserable, cold and wet, and the fun had long gone out of the run. Just reading this, I can't believe you start to question, so why are you going back to the desert? Why are you heading into the outback, Andrew? We'll continue on. Slowly, ever so painfully, slowly we made our way along the 10-kilometre stretch of road that appeared to never end. The pace was slow, frustratingly slow. The longer it took, the wetter and colder we got. After what seemed like an eternity, we reached the final checkpoint of the day. We were directed off the road, through the scrub basically, and towards the big red sand dune. We would run along this before dropping in on camp, based on the other side. As the weather worsened, driving rain, winds, cold temperature, we climbed Big Red. That is Big Red the sand dune. My hood blew off, yet again, but it was this time that I realised why I had got so cold. My hood, which had been hanging off the back of my jacket, had been filling with rain, and got to the point where it was overflowing down inside of the jacket and down my back. No wonder I felt like I was getting hypothermia. As we continued to run along the Big Red Ridge, we viewed the camp in the distance and continued to ponder what decisions had been made while we'd been out running in the conditions. What news would greet us when we ran back into camp? Would we be told the event was cancelled? Would they have buses on their way to take us into Birdsville, even just to have a warm shower or just to warm up? Perhaps they'd gone in and collected everyone's bags and brought them out so we had a decent change of clothes to help us dry off and warm up. It was a bit surreal coming down off Big Red towards camp, thinking we had almost done it. We'd almost completed the day, the marathon from hell. As we ran between the tents and down the finish chute, we were wet, cold and muddy, and so glad we were finishing. The race director was on the microphone to greet us in. As we crossed the line, he asked us how we were. We replied, cold and wet. His response shocked us. You'd be wanting yourselves changed into something warmer. We looked at each other dumbfounded. Like what? I wanted to scream. We offered no response. Instead, we turned and trudged through the thick mud, which was now worse than it was this morning, towards our tent. Upon reaching our tent, we stood at the front of it, staring at each other. Now what? We were wet, we were muddy, from head to foot. How do we do this? How do we change? How do we get inside the tent to get what little gear we had to change into without wetting or covering our sleeping gear with mud? Did I mention we were cold? How do we even touch or get on our clothes without wetting them or covering them in mud? How will we keep the other clothes we plan to put on dry or clean? We were now living in a mud bath, literally. Then a more pressing concern, if we were to change and our change of clothes were to get wet, what are we wearing to run tomorrow? The running gear we are currently in will not be dry for tomorrow. It's drenched. That leaves only clothes to wear tomorrow as being the ones we need to change into now. So if we don't change to keep the clothes for tomorrow, we have to stay in wet clothes now. If we do change, we are seriously looking at wearing wet clothes tomorrow. Did I mention our packs are wet and so are our thermals in them? I want to go home. Where's the bus? If there was one, I'm getting on it. So that is the day of Big Red, and now you're questioning and scratching your head going, what is he talking about? How is he going to? Why is he doing Larapinta? And what it comes back to, so to just push on from that. So what ended up happening at Big Red was they ended up having to call day 3 off as a rest day. It enabled the rain, which had stopped that night, gave a chance for the things to start to dry out, obviously not completely. Dead trees out there in the desert became clotheslines. We've got some great photos of a tree just covered in clothes and packs, running packs, and I think there were shoes hanging off another tree. Incredible pictures. So it became an enforced rest day. One, it gave people a chance to readjust, I guess, mentally and physically to recover from what we'd gone through on that day 2, the dreaded wet day. But also it gave the organisers a chance to, they actually had to reroute the course that we were planned to run because of the flooding in the desert. So that day 3, that third marathon that got cancelled, was never made up. And so for us, that meant that the 250 kilometres that we were running for juvenile diabetes, the 250 kilometres that people had supported us in doing, we were no longer doing. We were doing 208 kilometres in the desert at Big Red Run. And that reason, I think it meant that there was no closure from that when we finished the event. To us, we felt bad, I guess, in a sense that we hadn't done that 250 kilometres, and it was through no fault of our own. It was out of our hands that the weather conditions could not be controlled, and the organisers did what they had to do and to enforce that rest day and take that 42 kilometres off. I think, we were left without closure for that event. And it wasn't long after Big Red Run, reading a magazine, I read about the Larapinta Trail, not the Sonder Monster itself, because it hadn't been born as yet, but the Larapinta Trail itself. And there's a stage race they do of the Larapinta Trail. And it was very similar to Big Red. I think it was at the time I'm looking for closure for what had happened in the desert at Big Red at Birdsville, seeking closure, and discovered the Larapinta Trail stage race. And this is something I wrote in 2017, as I was a bit lost as to what I was training for. And so these are my thoughts at the time after reading about the Larapinta Trail. So my mind keeps wandering. I keep looking at different events. 6 weeks ago, Larapinta was an option. Spectacular 150 kilometre trail in the Northern Territory. So the stage race doesn't do the whole trail, it just does part of it. Over 4 days, I think. Strangely, you sleep in a motel room each night, and you get transported back to the trail each day. It definitely looks challenging, and the scenery would certainly be amazing. But there's always a but. I find the idea of being transported back to a motel room for the night and then back to the trail the next morning, well, it's weird. It's cheating in a way. It might be different if you finished the run for the day and the motel room was right there. You went in, you slept, you stepped out, and the next morning continued running. I think it's the idea of getting in a motor vehicle and leaving the trail. I find it hard to get my head around. It's funny too how suddenly Larapinta keeps popping up now that I've heard of it. One trail magazine initially had an article on it. Another one then had a photo, then another, then the magazine ad. Then Roy and HG mentioned it on their radio show. The trail, not the race. So Larapinta is definitely on the list of maybes. One day. So that's the first time I'd heard about it, and I was looking for closure. I was considering the Surf Coast Century 100 as well, but it was just a 100 kilometre. It wasn't a stage race. So that sort of crossed off as well. And I've written here just a bit further on from that Larapinta paragraph. I've also considered I could use the event to raise money for the Heart Foundation. I would love to get involved with them again. It's been too long. Will the event provide closure, if that's what I'm looking for? After only running 207 kilometres in the desert? Maybe not. But when I think of it, would any event provide closure? Is the only event to get closure from Big Red Run itself, and I'm not returning to it. The cost and the organisation of the event is enough to cancel that. So that is where the Larapinta first came to mind when I heard about it in 2017. And then it was in late 2020 that I read about the article about the Sonder Monster, an event that had been established in 2019. That's when they started the West Max Running Festival. So looking at the Larapinta Trail, just to give you a bit of background on it, the ABC actually had a great online article written by Emma Haskin on the 27th of May, 2021. And I'll try and include a link in the show notes below if you want to have a read of that. But it talks about the Larapinta Trail and where it evolved from. It actually came into being in 1988. During the 1980s, the Northern Territory National Parks were small and they were disconnected along the West MacDonnell Ranges. And then Alan Gins, a senior planner of the Northern Territory Conservation Commission, was commissioned to come up with a trail that connected them together. And so the Larapinta Trail was born. And they actually used 12 low security prisoners from the Alice Springs Correctional Facility to help build it. They built the majority of sections 1 and 2. of the Larapinta Trail. But that article is The Long Walk in the Desert and talks about its growing popularity with hikers and also runners. As I mentioned in the first podcast, Lucy Bartholomew recently did a fastest known time on the Larapinta and achieved that as the fastest woman. So congratulations to Lucy. And so, yeah, the Alice Spring Running Club, they developed the Westmax Running Festival, which includes the Sonder Monster, the 231-kilometre event, which I'm now training for. A bit of history on that event. It's only been run twice, even though it started in 2019. COVID obviously stopped it back in 2020. So in 2019, the event was won by Shane Johnston from Western Australia in a time of 40 hours and 55 minutes, 18 seconds. There were only 4 starters that year in the very first year, and 3 of them finished. Third place was 46 hours, 42 minutes. So 40 hours, 55 being first place in the first year. This year, there were 14 starters, so quite a jump from the 4 from the very first year. Of those 14, though, only 3 finished in the under 60 hours time limit. Remembering there's a 60-hour time limit for the Sonder Monster. Elizabeth Woodgate, a 57-year-old woman, won that in 56 hours and 52 minutes. Congratulations, Elizabeth. Great time. Second place was Mark Alexander, first male across the line in 57 hours 41. And third place was 59 hours and a minute. So coming in with 59 minutes to spare. Only 9 of the starters, remember there were 14 starters, only 9 of them reached the 6th checkpoint, and there's 10 checkpoints including the finish line. So it's not an easy course, and I don't expect it to be easy, and that's why I'm putting so much time and effort into my training and preparation, both physically and mentally, to ensure that I can have the best possible chance of finishing the Sonder Monster. When you do an event for the Heart Foundation, and the New York Marathon's another example, yes, I guess, for your own self, you want to finish the event in the best possible way you can, but you don't want to let who you're running for down, or your supporters. And so many people were so gracious with their support with me for my New York Marathon. And I know that was always in the back of my mind, especially in the tough days, or the tough moments of the marathon, that you want to get to the finish line and you don't want to not finish an event you're running that you've been supported in, whether through donations or just general support, and especially when you're running for a charity like the Heart Foundation. So I'm putting a lot of time, a lot of effort into the training, physically and mentally, to make sure I'm prepared. Those stats are right there. 3 out of the 4 people in the first year finished the race, and then this year, the most recent running of the event, 14 people started and 3 finished in under 60 hours. Interesting with the times difference there. And of course it comes back to, I guess, training involved. Conditions would be another bit. Strategy, I guess, how they took to the course. I know this year, Elizabeth Woodgate, the winner of the Sonder Monster this year, talked about how she ran harder of a night time when the desert temperatures were cooler as opposed to the day. I wonder how Shane Johnston ran it back in 2019 when his time 40 hours, 55 minutes. He's almost got 19 hours to spare there to the cutoff, where Elizabeth was just over 3 hours. So, and that's the thing, and Big Red Run's an example of that. You don't know what you're going to get when you turn up on race day and you stand on that start line. What's going to happen in the next 60 hours, weather-wise, injury-wise, nutrition-wise as well. You can have stomach issues from your nutrition, a lack of or too much of. So a lot of things go into or take place during an event that you can't control and you can't prepare for. But you've got to put yourself in the best possible position to be able to achieve the best possible scenario. And then for me, for the Sonder Monster and Mission 231, that is making sure I get to the finish line and do not only myself proud, but all my supporters, and especially the Heart Foundation. So looking forward to it, but I'll try and put the link in the show notes down the bottom so you can have a read of that article by the ABC, Emma Haskin. It's a really good article on the Larapinta Trail. And so, yeah, you look back at Big Red Run on that day, and maybe it was looking for closure from it that first brought Larapinta to my knowledge. I'm hearing of it for the first time. And I think the time has passed now where I'm not looking for closure, but I think the seed was originally planted. So when it's popped up again, the opportunity to do the Sonder Monster and something for the Heart Foundation and something outside my comfort zone, because that's what I'm after. I'm getting outside my comfort zone so I can grow myself as a person, go from overthinker to overcomer, and deal with my mental health issues of anxiety. The seed was originally planted when I was looking, what I thought I was looking for closure. But at the time, it's just the seed being put in the ground, and over time it sprouts and grows, and that's where we are now, where since Big Red, it's spent a lot of time just doing events here and there, nothing in particular, as I try to search where my running was going. Then I decided I was training for the Boston Marathon. I was training hard for that, and that's when my anxiety started to happen with some health issues there. We'll talk about that in another podcast. And then COVID happened, and a lot of virtual running last year, which actually got me back into the trails that I had loved so much as a kid and a youngster growing up doing cross country. Got led back to the trails there, and then, like I spoke about with the Larapinta the first time, how it kept popping up, and Roy and HG would mention it. It's the same this time. I mentioned that last week. Once I read the first article about the Sonder Monster, he saw something else and heard something else, and then Lucy Bartholomew did it. And the dots were connected and the picture was drawn. And the Larapinta is what I've chosen to get outside my comfort zone, to help me grow as a person, to help me go from overthinker to overcomer once again, and all in support of the Heart Foundation. So really excited and appreciate everyone's support. Before we wrap up for this episode, we'll have a look at our fundraising. We're currently sitting at $1,093. So thank you very much to all who have donated already. It doesn't reflect that on the fundraising page yet, but we've got some deposits that are to go in. But we're sitting at $1,093, which is a great start, really good start just from a couple of weeks as we head towards the 23.2 thousand mark. So thank you to all my supporters. Again, I'll put the link in the show notes, so if you want to get online and donate on my Mission 231 page, you can. And also I've got my blogs there you can read and see things I'm talking about, talk about my training. And I'll put my follows there on Instagram and Facebook if you want to follow the journey on those as well. And my Strava, if you want to check out my Strava and stalk it and analyze it, you're more than welcome to. Training-wise, training's been going really good, very consistent, which I'm really happy with. It's probably the most consistent I've ever run, and I'm feeling the dividends of that, feeling really good in myself, both physically and mentally. In the last week I went out with Craig again. We got together and had a run, our first run for a while together, and we did 4.5 hours around the trails of Lithgow, and my goodness, they were breathtaking. I didn't know Lithgow had so much trails, or so many trails around the town, so close to the town. I always thought it was just the main road up to Bracey's and to Haskin's, but there's so many trails there used by the mountain bikes and stunning scenery. So that was a really enjoyable 4.5 hour long run. That was last Saturday, and then this week's followed up with a tempo run and a couple of easier runs, and got a weekend planned of longer runs as well. But all going well with the training at the moment and getting the resistance training in as well. It's important to do the cross training, not just the running. I believe it helps, obviously, with strength, with mental strength as well, but keeps you, let's say, injury-free or less likely to be injury-prone as you strengthen the ligaments and the tendons and the muscles themselves. So really happy with the training. As I said, thanks again, everyone, for the initial support as we've got started. In the coming week that we're going into, we'll be announcing our first fundraising activity, which we want to get everyone involved in. Lots of fun, a great way to be active, stay fit, look after your health, and it's something that's very closely associated with the Heart Foundation as well. So keep an eye on the socials for that, and also on the fundraising page, and we'll reveal more in the coming days and get everyone involved and everyone being active. Well, I'm going to sign off there. I'm going to head off for a run. Until next week, make sure you run with heart, everyone. Bye.